This podcast is brought to you by Progressive. Most of you aren't just listening right now. You're driving, cleaning, and even exercising. But what if you could be saving money by switching to Progressive? Drivers who save by switching save nearly $750 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Multitask right now. Quote today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who save with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
At Bet365, we don't do ordinary. We believe that every sport should be epic. Every home run, every hit, every inning, every play. From the moments that are legendary to the ones that fly under the radar. Whether it's a walk-off grand slam or a base hit to center field. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. 21 plus only. Must be physically located in Virginia. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
The following podcast includes explicit language, including, well, you'll just have to wait and see.
Hi, I'm Josh Levin, and this is Hang Up and Listen for the week of April 15th, 2024. On this week's show, we'll talk about the death of O.J. Simpson and everything his life and his murder trial dredged up. And we'll be joined by Yahoo's Vincent Goodwill, who will help us look at the shenanigans and the storylines going into the NBA postseason. I'm in Washington, D.C. I'm the author of the book The Queen and the host of an upcoming slow burn season on the rise of Fox News and how the left tried to fight back. Also in D.C. is Stefan Fatsis. He is the author of the books Word Freak, A Few Seconds of Panic, and Wild and Outside. How are you, Stefan?
I'm great, Josh. How are you?
Was I a little too aggressive for you?
A little bit.
We're recording a little earlier than our usual, so I'm trying to amp up the energy. Let's see if the listeners can tell how energetic and or tired we are. With us from Palo Alto is the energy drink aficionado himself, Joel Anderson. It's pink today.
Yeah, well, it's strawberry. I have a whole 24-pack crate in the garage.
Oh, no.
Yeah. I'd made a promise to get off of this stuff. And, sometimes promises are made to be broken, you know?
You know what promise we never break? It's the promise we make to our Slate Plus members. We guarantee to you that we will drink strawberry energy drinks and provide a bonus episode every week. This week, we're going to talk about the crazy revelations in the case of Shohei Ohtani's interpreter, who reportedly stole $16 million from the baseball star to finance his gambling habit. We'll look back at how we talked about the case a few weeks ago and whether we and the rest of the media were too suspicious of Ohtani. If you want to hear that bonus episode, it's available right now. And if you don't subscribe, there are 2 ways for you to get on it. You can either subscribe right now by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen.
The O.J. Simpson of my 1970s childhood was the Buffalo Bills star who rushed for 2,003 yards in a season, the Hertz pitchman who ran through airports, the guy who beat pole vaulter Bob Seagren and soccer player Kyle Rote Jr. in The Superstars, and the actor in the blockbuster TV miniseries Roots and Hollywood thriller The Towering Inferno. When I was a kid, O.J. was everywhere. The reason for O.J.'s popularity was lost on me then, but not on him. People identify with me, and I don't think I'm that offensive to anyone, Simpson told the New York Times in 1976. People have told me I'm colorless. Everyone likes me. I stay out of politics. I don't try to save people for the Lord, and besides, I don't look that out of character in a suit. Simpson, who died last week at age 76, was the embodiment of all-American celebrity. He was a calculatingly inoffensive public figure who wanted to make money and be loved. And after no doubt murdering his ex-wife and a friend in 1994, one of the most repulsive tabloid figures the country has ever produced. Joel, you wrote a fantastic piece for Slate reckoning with the meaning of OJ and race and America and what the public got wrong about his life. But let's start with your own childhood memories of OJ in the late 80s and early 90s, which are very different from mine of OJ at the height of his athletic and cultural ubiquity.
Yeah, I mean, I think I came to understand who O.J. Simpson was about a decade after he'd already retired from the NFL. So at that point, he was sort of a creation of TV. He was an amiable sort of guy, someone who, as you just quoted, was explicitly non-political. He was unoffensive and really had a gift for projecting the image of charm, right? He just seemed like a nice guy, somebody that would, sign as many autographs as possible, who, would take a picture with you, that would make you feel good for knowing who he was and seeing him in public. And, as it got a little bit deeper into his retirement, he was very much a product of Hollywood, like a creation of Hollywood almost. And that spans back to his time at USC, which is anybody who lives in LA. People know how important USC is to the film industry and to Hollywood. So he had that advantage. But by the time I'm a kid, 10, 12 years old, he's a guy that's a little bit on TV, but mostly is known for hanging out, golfing at country clubs, socializing in Brentwood, just sort of, a socialite in a lot of ways. So there's all this artifice. You see all that around him. But I also don't think that I had the perspective to understand where he was at that time in his life. And I wonder, Stefan, if you'll remember that, and certainly you, Josh, but he's in his, late 30s, early 40s, a football great who, he excelled at everything publicly up until he retires, and then he doesn't do well in movies. He loses his job in sports broadcasting. He goes back to his acting career, and it's kind of a farce. So, we're seeing all this projection of like glamour, wealth, charm, but at that point in his life, he's a dude in his 40s, twice divorced, looking for purpose, hoping to stay relevant, and his path, he thought that the thing that he thought that would protect him, not talking about politics, not being explicitly racial, wanting to be seen as a nice guy on TV, it really hadn't helped to stay him afloat. He was still trying to figure out what he wanted to do. In a lot of ways, it was very Tiki Barber-ish. Not that Tiki Barber had ever, been accused of something, but somebody that everybody really looked forward to the next chapter of his life. And it kind of didn't go the way people thought. And, it just, in a lot of ways, in retrospect, it seemed really sad. But in the moment, Josh, as a kid, I thought, oh, this guy kind of figured it out. He transitioned from football and has managed to maintain his fame and money. Couldn't be that bad of a guy, right?
I think both of us remember him from the Naked Gun movies,
yep,
which were very important to me as a kid, just hilarious, and also kind of created this image around him as this bumbling character, physical comedian, certainly not a great actor, but somebody who I think for people of our generation, people who are in their mid 40s now, just a guy that we kind of associated with that movie franchise and just sort of like a benign figure and character. And as somebody who was obsessed with sports growing up, I knew it wasn't like, oh, this guy is an actor. Like I obviously knew the 2003 yards. I knew that he had played football, but I didn't have the like recall of the highlights or the games or that stuff. I probably learned about just by reading books and maybe seeing some interviews on TV. But the thing that I think we could have known, but we really didn't, was the domestic abuse. And for everything that the murder trial was, the reckoning around race and policing and, the focus on the absolutely, heinous crime, the murder of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman, the murders. It was also a story about a domestic abuser whose abuse was widely known by the police, by his friends. I think just I don't know about in the world, Stefan, but it was a story that just on that front, I think maybe, probably, hopefully would have played out differently today than it did back then. But in that case, his abuse was known about, excused, laughed off, in some cases. I think in the trial it came out that there were 62 documented instances of him assaulting, abusing his wife, Nicole. And that was just not on the public's radar. It was still OJ, the Hertz guy, OJ, the guy from the Naked Gun.
Yeah, because he was still OJ, the Hertz guy. Then he was still doing those ads for 20 years. I mean, those ads started in the mid-'70s, and he worked for Hertz until the murders.
When you're in a rush, take it from O.J. Simpson. There's only one superstar in rent-a-car, Hertz. Others claim to be fast, but nobody has more to do it faster. More pros to execute the toughest performance standards. More cars, more locations. First with every good idea to speed up service like the #1 club. Before you get there, your forms fill out, cars pre-assigned.
Go, OJ, go!
Rent a Ford fast from Hertz, the superstar in rent-a-car.
He actually was planning to, the morning after the murders, get on a plane and go to Chicago to talk to Hertz executives and play golf with them. Let's stick to Hertz for 1 second. The guy that brought OJ to Hertz, the senior executive, died on the same day that OJ did, coincidentally, at age 91. And he talked about how, in retrospect, it was a mistake. We knew about the first assault, and they stuck with him. The first assault, or one of the first assault that was public in 1989, when Nicole Brown was hiding in the bushes outside of her house, beaten badly. Hertz forgave it. Simpson pleaded no contest. Hertz kept him on. As with so many celebrities, there was this clear willingness to placate O.J. Simpson. People wanted to continue to view him as this amiable guy that was great at parties, even if people in his life knew that there was this less savory side. And not just the abuse, though clearly that was the worst of it, but just the way he treated people, apparently, and the way that he went about his business.
I mean, Joel, there were people that saw through him, including Ralph Wiley, who I know is a hero of yours and who you kind of quoted in the piece that you wrote for Slate.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just to briefly circle back about, the things that we could have known, right? Because you talk about this documented instance of domestic abuse in 1989. So that's in January, right? So again, let's just, for the timeline, this is January 1989. He's accused of domestic abuse. By that summer, NBC has welcomed him into its broadcast booth again. Mm-hmm. Like, this is not a guy that entered into that realm like on some sort of winning streak, right? Or like he had massive success in movies, in TV, and they had to bring him on. No, they made a choice in light of all this evidence. Like, not even a guy that had done well in TV, but a guy who had a credible accusation of domestic abuse against him, and they still brought him in, which is, I think, what Ralph Wiley was always trying to say about O.J. Simpson going back, some 30 years, is that people were really desirous of seeing O.J. succeed. And it wasn't, Black people that had elevated O.J. Simpson or wanted to see him in these positions. It's people at Hertz Rent-A-Car, people at CBS, NBC, all these other places that kept giving him opportunities, even though there was really no reason to. Football players retire every year. O.J. Simpson could have been retired, could have been replaced, and the American public would have moved on, but people still were desirous of seeing him succeed. And so one of the things that I sort of thought about in the way that O.J. was useful in this way, and having talked to a few people about it over the weekend, is that, O.J. kind of was the first sellout, like the first real explicit sellout among the Black athletes. If you notice, he came from a generation. It's kind of interesting that he and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar were both in college in LA at the same time. Mm-hmm. But OJ decided to turn away from the 1968 Olympics boycotts. He had nothing to say about the civil rights movement of the day.
The 68 Olympics, around that was the origin of the infamous quote, "I'm not Black, I'm OJ." He said that to Harry Edwards, I believe.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So he opted out, and it paid off very well for him. Hertz made him the first Black face of a national advertising campaign. And so a lot of other Black athletes look at that and they say, hey, there's a way forward here. I can make a lot of money, stay in public, have a lot of influence, and do that. And, Lou Moore, who's a professor at Grand Valley State who talked to me for my piece, he said something that I actually didn't put in the story, but he said, OJ led the way for Michael Jordan. That path didn't previously exist prior to OJ Simpson, but that somebody like Michael Jordan could sort of fill that vacuum in. And so, yeah, Josh, I think that was always a sort of the thing that, as it became, in retrospect, you look at it, you're like, oh, like OJ actually served a purpose, that his desire to be colorless, as he said, really appealed to people. And they kept promoting him in spite of problems that ordinarily would have sunken a lot of other people's careers.
Yeah, to be clear, Joel, the appeal was to white people.
Right.
It was to find a way for this guy who grew up in the projects in San Francisco and had succeeded on a football field to make himself as palatable as possible to the white audience that rents cars and buys orange juice and whatever other stuff that he promoted. Who was going to do that? OJ looked at the landscape of 60s and 70s race in sports and turned completely away from it. I mean, who was he going to be? Jim Brown, Kareem, Ali, Bill Russell, Kurt Flood, Bob Gibson? Were these guys going to be acceptable to the white American public? I mean, people talk about Jackie Robinson as a cultural folk hero. Jackie Robinson was reviled when he broke the color line. Ali was reviled when he didn't go to Vietnam. Is Reggie Jackson a closer analogy? Reggie was popular, but man, a lot of people hated Reggie. Reggie was a polarizing figure. I think the only other athlete that comes to mind, the only other black athlete of that era that comes to mind is Arthur Ashe. But Arthur Ashe was an intellectual who had principles and stood for something and maintained an integrity throughout his career in a very different sport.
Yeah, there's a kind of instrumentalism at work throughout OJ's life in all directions and in all different phases. OJ is using these white executives and creating this image of himself that he knows would be palatable. The white corporate world is obviously using him and doesn't care at all about the fact that he is a bad guy, like is known to be somebody who treats women horribly. And when the cameras aren't on, that the reality doesn't match the image he's projecting, it's immaterial. Like the surfaces are the only thing that matters. And then in the phase around the murder trial, Joel, there's this kind of long-running kind of, I don't know if it's a dispute or a question about who was supporting OJ during that period and why. And there's a kind of instrumentalism at work there too, that OJ was a tool to get back at the police, or OJ was a tool because of, what happened around the LA riots. And it doesn't matter who he is or what he did. He's just a way to get revenge or a way to get justice that was had been so lacking in these specific events and also just throughout American history.
Yeah, and and again, I'm gonna credit Ralph Wiley here. Ralph Wiley talks about all the many advantages that O.J. Simpson had along the way. Like, when's the last time you've seen a black person be able to have a slow-moving police chase like this, where the police give them that sort of a wide berth and just kind of allow them, a murder suspect, to just sort of determine the course of a chase, right? O.J. Simpson had done very well financially by that point, but like the people that assembled his legal team, I mean, that's a lot of money, probably a lot more money than O.J. Simpson had at the time. And Ralph Wiley has always said, well, who was helping to fund that defense? But also, there's another thing that I sort of was thinking about this morning before we talked about this, and I don't know if you guys felt like this. I didn't know shit about Nicole Brown Simpson. Like her life was just sort of an abstraction to me. And I felt really bad about that. And the one thing that I thought about is that American football is such a powerful, influential force in this country. Like it's crazy, right? Like, and it's mostly played by black men, people that, most white sports fans never have the opportunity to live near, talk to, whatever. Like, we know that this country is segregated fundamentally. And so most people don't actually get a chance to talk to the guys that play the sport. But football is such a powerful force in this country that a guy like O.J. Simpson, man, like, you can be accused of killing somebody like Nicole Brown Simpson and their life. I mean, a conventionally attractive white female victim can totally be erased. And it's a secondary issue here. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I felt like this during when Baylor went through its scandals, when Jameis Winston went through his deal in Florida State. I'm like, man, people love football so much that they will actually line up behind black dudes that they ordinarily don't fuck with. And they'll be like, well, I don't know. He might be guilty, he might not. A person like that is not typically roundly reviled in quite the way that you would expect. And football is responsible for a lot of that. Now, I think that the thing that happened with OJ is that he got off, and that sort of woke everybody up to, oh shit, like, like this guy got away with murder. But the idea that, we sort of lost track of Nicole Brown Simpson in this, who was very much a victim and had been battered by OJ ever since she was 18 years old, just sort of is mind-boggling to me. It just kind of reminds me like what football is capable of and the hold that it has over people in this country.
It's a great point. And there are stories like this one, maybe this one, number one among them, that just allow us to have these conversations about America and what this country is and what it means and all of these sort of larger issues. And O.J. Made in America, the documentary by Ezra Edelman, captured that. But, as you noted in your piece, Joel, like Ralph Wiley was writing great stuff about O.J. There was an HBO documentary, O.J. in black and white, that came out in the early 2000s. And we're still talking about O.J. now. And there's something kind of tawdry about the trial. Like, I remember them doing the recaps on like E! Entertainment Television. There's obviously like the O.J. prank show, Juiced, and just like all of his like afterlife on social media, where he's just being this kind of like disgusting individual who just seemed, obviously overexposed doesn't quite capture it, but just somebody who like wouldn't go away and was just like kind of always in your face. And so the way that the story was just, on the one hand, kind of tabloidy, on the other hand, just like epic and tragic in its scope, and that it captured our attention. I mean, I remember watching The Verdict when I was in 9th grade, I think. I remember watching the Bronco chase when I was at my grandparents' house. I remember like being in that room watching the NBA Finals, the Rockets-Knicks series, and then breaking in to show the chase. There's just a way that I'm sure something else is going to, I guess the Trump story has captured America's attention in the same way and is similarly kind of epic in scope and what it says about America and what it captures. But it's really just like a handful of these things per century that do that. And, there are people who are in their early to mid 30s now who only know OJ as or whose first understanding of who OJ was as the criminal defendant. And now there are going to be people who only know him as like a guy who's, died in 2024, and you like watch TikToks about him or whatever, however it is that people consume the stuff. But he's a guy who people will know about in like 100 years, probably. I mean, it's kind of what he wanted, but not in the way that he anticipated.
And that's the thing ultimately about OJ. And you write about this in your piece, Joel. It's that similar to Trump, it's like this guy, this motherfucker is the one that becomes president. This motherfucker is the one that is acquitted. You quote Wiley, of all the innocent black men who rotted in jails and swung from trees for crimes they didn't commit all over the landscape through this bloody century and the entire history of the country, out of all those doomed, forgotten people, this is the guy who gets off. O.J. Simpson was, for all of his willful success in attaining what he wanted to attain from a very young age, which was to be an accepted American celebrity, almost feels like, it just tarnishes everything we know about culture when people like this are the ones that succeed and get what they want and then show their asses to the world. And OJ certainly did that in a worse way than almost anybody in our popular culture in modern America. Joel is going to dive deeper into OJ's broadcast career in our Afterballs segment this week. But before that, we'll talk to Vincent Goodwill of Yahoo about the upcoming NBA playoffs.
Looking for an assist with your credit card, but can't get a hold of anyone? Luckily, with 24/7 US-based live customer service from Discover, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, you heard that right. You can talk to a real human in customer service anytime. Sounds like a real game changer. Make the right call and get the service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. Apple Card is the perfect cashback rewards credit card. You earn up to 3% daily cash on every purchase, every day. That's 3% on your favorite products at Apple, 2% on all other Apple Card with Apple Pay purchases, and 1% on anything you buy with your titanium Apple Card or virtual card number. Visit apple.co/card calculator to see how much you can earn. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch, subject to credit approval. Terms apply. Going into the final day of the NBA regular season, almost everything was undecided. And when the day was over, a lot of stuff was still unclear, with the Lakers and the Warriors among the teams shunted into the play-in bracket, games scheduled for Tuesday and Wednesday. But one thing that did get decided, thanks to Jalen Brunson's overtime heroics, was that the New York Knicks clinched the number 2 seed in the East. And for their trouble, locked themselves into a tough first-round matchup against either Joel Embiid's 76ers or last year's NBA finalist, the Miami Heat. Joining us now is Vincent Goodwill. You can read his stuff on Yahoo Sports and listen to him on the Good Word podcast on Yahoo Sports' Ball Don't Lie channel. Vinny, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So it was a really fascinating final day. While the Knicks went all out, damn the consequences, the Cleveland Cavaliers were trying to lose hard. They ran their offense through Tristan Thompson in the year 2024 against the lowly Hornets. And the Cavs did succeed, I guess, in losing. They got pushed down to the number 4 seed in the East bracket, maybe getting themselves a favorable first-round matchup against the Magic. But Vinny, what do you think of those shenanigans and about teams trying or not trying to game the bracket?
Better that you're doing the shenanigans on the last day of the regular season than doing it in the last 6 weeks of the regular season because you're tanking to try to get, the next extraterrestrial. There's certain things that are just gamed into the system that you cannot avoid. And the one thing about the New York Knicks that you can say is Tom Thibodeau will sell his soul and your mother's soul for one single regular season win. All right. He is not at all concerned about your playoff seeding and what this means and permutations and all that stuff. He's trying to get a W, right? With the Cavs, all they did was just put themselves in the crosshairs of the Boston Celtics in round 2 if they get out of round 1. So every shenanigan has some level of reaction that isn't necessarily going to be favorable. So I don't necessarily look at them with my nose turned down. I'm trying to figure out whoever ran their offense through Tristan Thompson. You said in the year 2024, show me somebody that ran their offense through Tristan Thompson in 2006.
They didn't even do that at Texas, like when he was when he was in college. So yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the point you're making, and Stefan, we were talking about this a little bit before we started recording, is that you're going to have to play the Celtics or the Nuggets or whoever at some point. So what are you ultimately achieving? Is your goal, are you going to raise a banner for beating the Magic in the first round? If you even do that. I mean, the Cavs' performance in the playoffs last year was the most abysmal, definitely of last year, maybe in the last 5 years. So the idea that they're trying to be all smart and we're going to find a weaker opponent, it's look in the mirror, dudes.
Well, you got to think. They had an 18-1 stretch midway through the season. Without that stretch, they're not even a 500 team. And I know all the games count, all the pieces matter, but they have their own issues to sort out. And I think it is really big for them in their eyes to win a playoff series without LeBron James. That has not happened. They have not won a playoff series without LeBron James's name attached to it. I don't think in this millennium, let me be perfectly honest, I think it's been since maybe 1993 And I don't think I'm exaggerating here. Like the days of Mark Price and Brad Daugherty and Larry Nance, the daddy, not Larry Nance, the son. You know what I mean? Like that's how long ago it was. We got lineages that have not seen playoff wins in Cleveland without LeBron. So yeah, and by and large, and that goes for the Lakers too. Like everybody's saying the Lakers should try to lose tomorrow against New Orleans to get out of the crosshairs of the champs. Look, no matter who you play, you're going to be in the crosshairs of someone good. And I don't believe in basketball gods and all that stuff, but I do believe in if you're not good, it's going to show.
Little Craig Elo erasure there, just for the record.
Sorry.
That's all right. The Knicks. Josh, you mentioned my Knicks. Got the 2 seed, did not care. Dante DiVincenzo played like 52 minutes and 34 seconds of the Knicks 1-point win over the Bulls on Sunday to secure the number 2 seed. Look, you finish number 2, you get, if you win your first round series, if you're going to win, you have to win. So you get a home series there, you get another home series, and then if all things go well, you're playing the Celtics eventually. This seems to be a more interesting strategy to me. Like, win the games. They won 50 games, This is great.
It's a huge thing. It's a huge thing for a Knicks franchise that they don't win playoff series. They don't win 50 games. That's not in their history. Like, we think of the Knicks as being one of the storied franchises, which they are. But the last time they won an NBA championship, I was 11 years away from being born. You know what I mean? Like, that's how long ago this thing was. But I do think for the Knicks, considering all the injuries that they've had this year and the fact that Tom Thibodeau is firmly in Coach of the Year discussion, and you got Jalen Brunson, who's thrusted himself into MVP discussion in the absence of Julius Randle, that means something to those people. You can't sell losing games in New York City, and you can't sell that to a coach, like I said, who would sell every ounce of his blood for one regular season win. And I think if you go into the playoffs and you're going against the Miami Heat or Philadelphia 76ers, 2 teams that are rivals and that you've played in the playoffs, Philadelphia and New York haven't played each other since 1989, but just they're rivals in terms of proximity. If you want to get to the conference finals, it doesn't matter who's in front of you. If you're as good as you think you are, you're going to have to play everybody that's in front of you to get to the Boston Celtics. And who knows what type of breaks could happen between now and then that could set the Knicks up for us to see them in June. I know they're your Knicks. They're not playing in June, but I understand the optimism, okay?
Well, I mean, there's something to be said, right, for just trying to game the system for as long as you can, right? Because you never know, somebody could go down and get hurt. Like Tatum could, God forbid, something could happen to him, right? And so you want to string it out. But actually, Vinny, I've heard you talk about the Celtics, and we all know, like, they've been great, like, by the numbers, like regular season. Like, I'm not going to say they're unprecedented force, but like the way that they played this year, that it's one of the better regular seasons in recent memory, excluding, I guess, the Warriors or whatever. So it's fair to say they're the prohibitive favorites in the East, but my suspicion is that you do not have very much faith in that cohort, correct?
Well, I don't have much faith that they're as good as their record. I just don't have faith that any of the other 7 teams that are going to be in the playoffs are worth a damn. Like, it is a mediocre crop of teams. And you can say that Milwaukee with Giannis Antetokounmpo and Damian Lillard and Doc Rivers, if they get their stuff together, they would be a formidable opponent in a 7-game series against Boston. I look at Boston like I look at those old Indianapolis Colts teams, the Reggie Wayne, Peyton Manning, Marvin Harrison teams, the ones that didn't break through. They would play on that track in Indianapolis. They would blow teams out with one of those post routes, and then you put them in wind, rain, and snow, and that ball wasn't cutting through the air like it was cutting through air conditioning. You know what I mean? Like, it was a lot different. And I think that's the way I look at Boston and their 3-point shooting. They shoot an enormous amount. Half of their shots come from 3. That means you're going to blow a lot of teams out if you're shooting a decent percentage, and they defend at a high level. The problem is what happens in the playoffs when, they're allowing a lot more physical contact. There's a lot more touching. Fatigue comes into play. That shooting becomes more of a variance than it becomes a certainty. And what is the counterpunch for the Celtics? They haven't needed one this year, but they haven't developed one either.
And if they have to play the Knicks outdoors at the Rucker, it's going to be just like the Colts situation.
Tibbs would probably fit well in the Rucker. You probably have one of those Sergio Tacchini tracksuits from the 80s, and he'd fit right in over there.
Vinny, there's all these lists of, which player, which team has the most pressure on them going into the playoffs. You see, guys like Dame on those lists, or Rudy Gobert, or the Clippers guys, or everybody. There are a lot of teams that are like all in and want to win now. But I really do think that Jason Tatum is the guy who has the most pressure on him, because this is a team that, if they don't win the East, massive failure and disappointment based on regular season performance and just based on the track record of these players. But Tatum has not played well in the clutch this year. He has some history of great playoff performances. And I think if they don't win this year, it's hard to, other than health, the reason, if we're like thinking, how could that have happened? It'll probably be because Jason Tatum didn't play like a top 3 or top 5 player in the league. So for me, that's the guy who must be feeling the pressure. And I think everybody in the NBA world is going to be looking at him this playoffs.
I think if you go back through NBA history, and I'm a 1984 baby, but 1984 is an inflection point because that is the year where it's 4 playoff rounds and, 7-game series. If you go back from that 40-year span, the only team to win a championship without having a top 5 or top 5-ish player was the 2004 Pistons, the ultimate anomaly, right? Jason Tatum, if he fancies himself as a top 5 player, he should be able to not only get the Celtics to the finals, but get a win out of it. And I'm not sure if he's good enough in that way. Like, getting to the finals is literally like the Mendoza line for the Celtics. And I'll tell you this much too, Josh. If the Celtics don't get to the finals, this could be one of those earth-changing years in the Eastern Conference, because if the Celtics have 64, 65 wins, they don't get to the finals, all these other teams that are like the land of misfit toys, they're going to try to really get their stuff together in the offseason, because they're going to sense an opportunity at the top. They're going to sense that there's a power vacuum. And the last time that really happened was 2007, when LeBron took literally LeBron and the LeBron heirs to the NBA Finals. And the Boston Celtics of Danny Ainge said, you know what? If one dude can get a team to the NBA Finals, I can go get 3 dudes, and Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, who's already there, and Ray Allen. And that changed the course of NBA history once he did that, all because of what LeBron James did. If Jason Tatum can't do it this year, I have a really good feeling that other teams are going to really try to load up.
Well, so we spend a lot of time in the East, and as much as I would love to ask you about the Bucks, so I'm sure we'll have time to talk about them, but we're doing all this talk, and I've heard you on your show, Vinny, talk about this. Like, it just kind of seems like, great. Boston could do something. You know what I'm saying? Joel Embiid, it'll be nice to see him show up. The Thunder and the Wolves, really nice story, right? Mavs could make a little run, but I mean, come on. Like, what are we doing here? I mean, it's Denver, right? Like, we're just waiting for the Nuggets to like go ahead and make this official, right, over the next couple months.
Yeah, it's like a couple that's dating and they got the ring, except one person doesn't know, and you're just waiting on the day for the proposal to happen. You know what I mean? That's where we're at with Denver. They're a team that they get bored with the regular season. They got bored with the regular season because that's what happens when you win a championship. There are no more big games until there are big games. And yeah, there are some things that are a cause for alarm. But when you have the best player in basketball, arguably a top 15 player of all time, at the peak of his prime, at the peak of his sort of championship sort of arrogance, like there's an arrogance that champions have, that they're never out of a game and they know they can take you out of a game from the moment they walk into the building. I don't see a scenario in which Denver, with relative health and sanity, does not make the NBA Finals at the very least. I think they're going to win, and I think they're going to win relatively easy. So much for competitive balance, but I just think they're that good, and that dude is that special. And the Western Conference is really good. There's like a bunch of teams that like 10 teams between, 46 wins and 50 wins, but none of those teams have that guy.
That guy's going to have to play the Pelicans or the Lakers in the first round of the playoffs. And the Pelicans or the Lakers could pull a Cavs here and try to avoid the Nuggets. That one seems to make a little bit more sense than what the Cavs were trying to do in the East Conference.
I don't know, man. You're risking not making the playoffs at all. That seems like it makes less sense to me.
It doesn't make sense. It sort of goes against what we consider competition. Like, and I feel like people who are really smart are trying to say really smart things, and they're outsmarting themselves. Like, the Lakers blew out the Pelicans by what it felt like was 50 points yesterday. So I don't think that the Pelicans will throw the game in the effort of trying to get away from Denver. They may just lose by 50 because they're going to lose by 50 tomorrow. And as far as the Lakers are concerned, they're 0-4 against the champions this year. They got swept last year, in which we all gave them some sort of collective medal, for getting swept by Denver last May because they happened to make it there and they're the Lakers. But they're not that great against the Sacramento Kings or Golden State Warriors either. They're 1-3 against Golden State. They're 0-4 against Sacramento. So if you lose a game on purpose, trying to avoid the Denver Nuggets, you're going to mess around and find yourself going home after Friday night because one of those other teams is going to beat you.
And so, Vinny, I've heard you talk about Wemby, and one of the bigger things is that, you're thinking about his place on the all defense team, if there is one, but you've seen him a lot this year. What do you make of this rookie year? It seemed like not only did he live up to the hype, but if possible, did he exceed it?
Yes, he exceeded it. For one, we didn't think that he was going to be able to stay on the floor as much as he did. The games that he missed, he didn't miss them because of the injury. He did because the Spurs tried to do this long-term thing and hold him out. But he looked to be much more physically prepared for basketball professionally in the NBA than even people gave him credit for. And they curtailed his minutes. They tried to make sure that he wasn't overtaxed. But in the second half of the season, Joel, he averaged 23, 12, 5 assists, and almost 5 blocks a game. And this is under limited usage. So I'm going to say this hot take. I know this isn't a hot take thing, but the only players who will be definitively better than Nikola Jokic, than Victor Wembanyama next year will be Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, and Joel Embiid. He's a top 5 player going into his second year. We have not been able to say that about any player. If I want to be bold, maybe Michael Jordan in 1985 before he hurt his foot, he was a top 5 player. But I can't even say LeBron James was a top 5 player going into his second year.
Incredible. And just to bring it back to the playoffs, and thinking about the kind of power structure of the NBA in years to come, especially in the West, there are these teams. I would put the Suns, the Lakers, the Clippers, and the Warriors in the category of they got to win right now. The Warriors are not going to, they're the 10 seed, but those are the teams that are not, it's hard to envision them being better next year than they are this year. And then you have the Grizzlies, the Spurs, and the Rockets, who are definitively going to be better and are going to be in contention. And I think people might say, oh, the Thunder, the Wolves, those teams aren't going anywhere. If we look at the playoff bracket next year, it's obviously impossible to predict, but I think it's way more likely that these star franchises, the Lakers, the Clippers, the Warriors, and the Suns are the ones who are going to be outside looking in or desperately fighting to get in the play-in next year. And I think we haven't fully reckoned with that fact. Well, we can let them enjoy the postseason this year, but I feel like the West is going to look a lot different next year than it does this year.
I think they know what's coming. They not only know what's coming because of function of the talent that's around the league, but by function of their ages. When you think about Kawhi Leonard and James Harden and Paul George and with the Clippers, they're moving into that new building, but they know they don't have a large window because those guys are old and those guys get hurt. And add to the fact, let's appreciate the fact that we consider the Los Angeles Clippers, the former Los Angeles Clippers of Donald Sterling, a star franchise. That's how high they've elevated themselves, considering what we've known them to be as the Bad News Bears for the better part of 40 years. But when you consider that Stephen Curry and LeBron and KD are reasonable facsimiles of themselves at their advanced ages, normally guys in previous NBA history are retired or done by this time. Those guys are still effective, but they're not able to impact winning the way that they've been able to. And we've been talking about, hey, when is going to be the change under the guard? When is the LeBron and Steph thing going to end? When is the league going to move on from them? I think we're starting to see it. We just don't recognize it. We won't recognize it until it's too late. But the Anthony Edwards experience, the Chet Holmgren experience, those dudes are snatching the mantle away from the old guys. And honestly, that's the way it should be.
Go Pelicans. Vincent Goodwill, you can read his stuff on Yahoo Sports. Listen to him on the Good Word podcast. Vinny, thanks so much, man.
My condolences to your Pelicans.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now. getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $750 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So, just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
At Bet365, we don't do ordinary. We believe that every sport should be epic. Every home run, every hit, every inning, every play. From the moments that are legendary to the ones that fly under the radar. See for yourself when you sign up today and get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. 21 plus only. Must be physically located in Virginia. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Terms and conditions apply.
Can you set the stage a little bit so people understand what happened?
In 1969, 14 black student athletes were kicked off their university's American football team for planning a show of support against racism.
We were really protesting our treatment on the field.
Amazing Sports Stories from the BBC World Service tells their story.
We became brothers that day when you did that to us.
We made a change.
Fighting for what we deserve.
Search for Amazing Sports Stories wherever you get your BBC podcasts.
Now it is time for Afterballs, sponsored by Bennett's Prune Juice, endorsed by Kenny Sailors, who says it was okay. Last week, the great Hawaiian-born sumo champion Taro Akebono died of heart failure at the age of 54. His New York Times obituary is a great read and puts Akebono's life and career in context. Akebono was the 64th Yokozuna, or grand champion, in the history of sumo wrestling, and the first foreigner to ever get that designation. He was born Chad Rowan in 1969 and was a high school basketball player before moving to Japan to pursue sumo. He became a Yokozuna after just 5 years, and a few years after that became a naturalized Japanese citizen, taking the name Akebono, meaning dawn. And spurred on by his example, the sport of sumo came to be dominated by foreign wrestlers, including, the Times obituary reports, Mongolians, a Georgian, and an Argentine. Akebono, we remember you. Joel, what is your Akebono?
I don't know if OJ deserves it, but he's the Akebono. It's mentioned in most of his obituaries and in my piece for Slate.com over the weekend. I'm sure some people know that O.J. Simpson was the first black announcer on a network's #1 NFL team when ABC hired him for Monday Night Football in 1983. And it's one of the few areas of his life that was sort of a surprise to me, in part because it didn't last very long, and also because he was terrible at it. O.J. Simpson joined the broadcast booth with Howard Cosell and Don Meredith in August of '83. It was a few weeks before the NFL season opened, and he came aboard with a lot of hype. One newspaper columnist called him the premier football player of his time and one of the most popular professional athletes of all time. And he predicted that Simpson would give Monday Night Football a much-needed shot in the arm. That didn't seem too far-fetched at the time, especially if you consider how famous Simpson was in the 1970s and 80s. Simpson had claimed that ABC had tried to hire him while he was still playing in Buffalo, which wouldn't have been much of a conflict because, as he said, the Bills were rarely considered good enough to be featured on Monday Night Football. But ABC still clearly had its sights on Simpson as his career came to an end. Here's Howard Cosell in 1979 with a send-off for Juice when he retired #2 on the NFL's all-time rushing list.
The Juice going out on top. Maybe his team wasn't, but the Juice was. And throughout his extraordinary career, his personality, his character shone through, his buoyancy. And so, au revoir, O.J.
But after weighing a few offers, Simpson signed a deal not with ABC, but with NBC to be an actor, sports commentator, and all-purpose guest. Sort of, again, like Tiki Barber. But for years, Simpson had been considered a lock for on-screen success because of his charm, his polish, those rugged good looks. Unfortunately for NBC, Little of that came across on the small screen. After Simpson's cameo role in the original Roots miniseries, an unnamed Hollywood actor who claimed to be friendly with O.J. told the L.A. Times, "I was really embarrassed for him. He looked like he was auditioning for a Hertz commercial. He delivered his lines all wrong." But that's acting. And with the help from his old friend Howard Cosell, Simpson got back into football at ABC. But it was Simpson who actually helped Cosell out of a jam in week 1 that season. Some of you might remember during a game between Washington and the Dallas Cowboys, Cosell made a reference to Washington receiver Alvin Garrett as that little monkey. This is OJ's, first year on TV, right? As you can imagine, it created a controversy, and Cosell would apologize, but say his remark was not remotely connected to racism, and that his record on behalf of black athletes is a matter of public record. Rushing to his defense, was Simpson, who said, quote, "Any black person who knows Howard and his stand on John Carlos, Tommy Smith, Kurt Flood, Muhammad Ali, knows that Howard is a good man. You should never doubt his feelings racially." Good man, OJ. Ready to run a little defense for your guy.
What about OJ's feelings about Tommy Smith, John Carlos?
Yeah, I had no feelings.
Yeah, I didn't see if they did a follow-up there. And a few weeks later, Howard Cosell repaid some of that debt when OJ was part of the booth in his first return home to Buffalo.
Well, it's real exciting for me to be back here, on a field that I had so many thrills and the experience these Buffalo Bills fans, and believe me, Howard, they're in rare form tonight.
Believe me, you're very special to me, and it's a great evening for Frank and me to be here with you, enjoying the comeback. And I think we said it all one night when with Dandy we said, Miami has the oranges, but Buffalo has the juice.
The good vibes among that crew didn't last much longer. By November, ABC was openly fretting about the declining ratings of the Monday night games. And one of the most frequent targets of criticism was O.J. Simpson. A Miami Herald columnist wrote, O.J. Simpson could use grammar lessons, but at least he was understandable this time. In previous games, he sounded as if he had a sock in his mouth. Another wrote, I cannot understand why a network would have Simpson broadcasting anything. He sure could run, but he can't talk. By the next year, the complaints about Simpson piled up, and it was hard for ABC executives not to take notice. Gus Stevens of the San Diego Union-Tribune wrote, O.J. Simpson has thoughts in his head, but he has trouble getting them from his brain to his mouth in a fashion that listeners can decode. In a survey in Sport Magazine, you guys remember Sport Magazine?
Oh, yeah.
See? In which readers were asked whom they would like to exile from the NFL booth forever, Simpson received the most votes, 33% of them. Things grew so desperate that by January 1985, for ABC's first ever Super Bowl broadcast, Simpson was bumped for Washington QB Joe Theismann. Instead, Simpson was assigned to a pregame show and halftime show with Dallas Cowboys coach Tom Landry. In a later interview, Simpson tried to downplay the demotion with a very strange joke. Here's the quote. Early in the year, I read in the newspaper that I was taking out Theismann's fiancée. Later, I read that I was taking out his ex-wife. And now, he's taking out my two partners in the Super Bowl. A little weird, but okay. Cosell, who had left ABC earlier in the year, only compounded OJ's troubles by ripping him in interviews, particularly in his memoir, I Never Played the Game. Cosell said of Simpson that, I thought his speech was improving and he could handle the assignment. I was wrong. The damage was done. Simpson lasted one more year at ABC through an ill-fated attempt to pair Joe Namath with Frank Gifford in the booth. By the following March, they had parted ways with ABC. Namath, years later, gave an interview to Howard Stern about his time working with Simpson. And as I mentioned in that piece on Slate that centers heavily on the late, great Ralph Wiley's observations about working with Simpson, OJ's coworkers didn't seem to like him very much. Here's a clip of Namath.
Well, you know what? I still try to live by if you don't have something good to say about somebody, try not to say it at all.
Yeah, man. Just imagine that. Imagine having the opportunity to say something about OJ and just passing on it.
Yeah, OJ was terrible in the booth. And coming off of the great Monday Night Football booths that I remember when I was a really little kid, Cosell, Don Meredith, Alex Karras, he was in a lose-lose position because those guys were brilliant and funny and smart and thoughtful. And OJ was none of those things.
It's funny, like the point that you were making earlier, Joel, about OJ kind of being sui generis in some ways, but also just showing what football stardom can get you in our culture. Like Drew Brees lasted a year. Like that guy is like a white quarterback and was, I think by everyone's admission, bad in the booth. And they got his ass out of there like really fast. But OJ, I mean, everybody knew that OJ wasn't good. And maybe the surprising thing isn't that he got exiled from the booth. It's that he lasted in that job as long as he did. It's kind of reminiscent of Emmitt Smith, right? Like as somebody who was criticized for being marble-mouthed, for having, you know, these malapropisms. But Emmitt wasn't he always just like on panels and pregame shows and stuff? He wasn't actually calling games.
And that's true. You know who else I thought of? And this is, I guess this kind of goes back to a time when Monday Night Football held a different place in the American imagination. Like they gave that job to Eric Dickerson at one point, right? Like Eric Dickerson kind of went through the same thing where people were like, he's just not good at talking. And I don't think he lasted very long either, maybe a year or two. So, yeah, they tried this for a long time. But I think the thing that was different with OJ is that people had seen him talk. Like if you watch interviews of him, and there are a lot of them on there before 94, you can see what people saw in him, right? Like it's there, but he, for whatever reason, he just couldn't translate that into real, lasting success.
I mean, I would put Joe Montana maybe in the category too of people who have so much charisma on the field and even like on screen, but just aren't really able to communicate.
Magic Johnson.
Magic Johnson is maybe the number one example. Yeah, I'm surprised we hadn't come up with that. Yeah, Magic is a fascinating character too in so many different ways.
80s LA.
Man.
I mean, yeah.
The coda to all of this, Joel, that's kind of interesting is that, we talk about OJ as the first black color commentator on Monday Night Football or on a network broadcast. But in 1974, almost a decade earlier, ABC hired Fred Williamson into the booth on Monday Night Football and basically fired him after the preseason, declaring him unsuitable by the network. And he was replaced by Alex Karras.
I remember the Alex Karras era. Don't you? Like, was Alex the guy that was in
you do not, man. You remember right? The Dan Deerdorf era. Alex Karras was on Monday Night Football from 74 to 76.
But wait, Alex Karras was in Webster, right? Was that him? Oh, okay. Well, that's what I remember from, not Dan Deerdorf then, sorry.
That is all for this episode. But we've also got a bonus episode that's live right now on the latest crazy revelations in the story of Shohei Ohtani's alleged money-stealing, gambling-addicted interpreter. To listen, subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup+ to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available, as I said, right now. We will see you over there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. And don't forget to subscribe to the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer is Kevin Bendis. For Joel Anderson and Stefan Fatsis, I'm Josh Levin. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thanks for listening. Looking for an assist with your credit card, but can't get a hold of anyone? Luckily, with 24/7 US-based live customer service from Discover, everyone has the option to talk to a real person anytime, day or night. Yep, you heard that right. You can talk to a real human in customer service anytime. Sounds like a real game changer. Make the right call and get the service you deserve with Discover. Limitations apply. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
At Bet365, we don't do ordinary. We believe that every sport should be epic. Every home run, every hit, every inning, every play. From the moments that are legendary to the ones that fly under the radar. Whether it's a walk-off grand slam or a base hit to center field. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. 21 plus only. Must be physically located in Virginia. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.